28 years old, Nancy McKevers passed away in her home in the Durham community of Washington County, Oregon, on a chilly winter morning in 1983. She was thought to have committed suicide, and there was no suspicion of foul play. The family tried to come to terms with Nancy's passing as the case went cold because it was thought to be a suicide. After 40 years, fresh information surfaced that completely altered the case's trajectory. In 2023, the Nancy McKevers case's mystery was finally solved. After 40 years, what new information enabled police to discover the truth? Hello and welcome back to Mystery Detective, where we discuss spooky crimes and mysterious cases of solved and unsolved crime stories. Today, we're examining the 40-year-old cold case involving Nancy McKevers, which was finally solved in 2023. The Portland metro area is made up of Washington County, which is Oregon's second most populous county out of the state's 36 total counties. One of the main factors that draws people to the Washington County of Oregon and makes them want to settle there is the spectacular backdrop and the rich flora that surrounds it. The allure of this area is the friendly people, the old-fashioned homes, and the hills and mountains that surround the splendid landscape. It is the most populous Washington County in America, with about 600,000 residents. It provides a haven for people looking to escape the bustle of daily life with a culturally vibrant community and a wide range of recreational options, like hiking, nature walking, and fishing. But regrettably, it also holds a sinister secret, and it is in this neighborhood that our case today began. In the year 1955, Nancy McKevers was born in Oregon. Lenore Pepper, Nancy's mother, who is currently 97 years old, was accustomed to hearing the adjectives sweet and beautiful used to describe her daughter. Nancy was described as friendly by everyone, regardless of whether they had known her for years or were just meeting her. Both of Nancy's sisters were very close to her. She was loved by both her younger sister, Diane Grill, and her older sister, Janet Eglitis, because she was the middle child. Between her mother and the sisters, she frequently served as a mediator. People enjoyed interacting with Nancy and spending time with her because of her loving, caring nature and outgoing personality. Her maternal instincts were very strong, and she had always been the most compassionate of her sisters. She consequently loved being a mother after she married Randall Randy McKevers and gave birth to a son. Everyone was aware of the fact that she loved being a mother. The aspirations of Nancy's sisters as children were realized because of her love for them and her own child. The three sisters had intended to raise their children jointly. Unexpectedly, the three sisters' first children were born 18 months apart. Their happy and close-knit upbringing was already planned, but in a tragic turn of events, it was to be abandoned in the end. It was a chilly winter morning in the stunning Washington County of Oregon. On January 2, 1983, police received a call from Randall McKevers at 10:38 in the morning. Randall appeared to be inconsolable over his wife's suicide. Deputies from the Washington County Sheriff's Office arrived at the 17300 block of Southwest Rivendell Drive in Durham, a neighborhood that had joined Washington County after 1983 but had not previously been a part of it. The body of Nancy McKevers with a gunshot wound to the head was discovered by the police. Despite the seriousness of the wound and the odds against Nancy surviving, paramedics sped to transport her to a nearby hospital. By merely looking at her, she was almost immediately declared dead. Nancy McKevers' death was determined to be a suicide. At the crime scene, a Smith & Wesson revolver was discovered and taken by the detectives. Inconsistencies on what might have happened to Nancy didn't emerge until after the police began questioning suspects. Only Nancy had been at home during the alleged suicide, along with her 30-year-old husband, Randall, and their 1-year-old son. The crime scene led the investigators to wonder whether Randall had witnessed the suicide or if it took place in a closed area. To make a progress in the investigation, the police needed to wait for the forensic reports. The Nancy McKevers' case proved to be much more complicated than the police had anticipated once they received the reports. It didn't take long for investigators to realize there was something else going on in this case after the autopsy report, forensic tests, and ballistic tests were done. The crime lab of the Oregon State Police quickly determined from the medical reports that the case could not have been a suicide. There were far too many irregularities. It is possible to detect gun residue on someone's hands and clothing by taking samples and processing them to look for fused lead, antimony, or barium particles. The first discrepancy was that Nancy's hands were free of any signs of gunshot wounds, but it didn't directly demonstrate anything. This is because the residue can easily be washed away when it comes into contact with other things and can only be detected 6 to 8 hours after the shot was fired. So, even though it was a significant discovery, it was insufficient. When the medical examiners stated that Nancy's wound was too wide to be a suicide case, the second inconsistency appeared. The distance between the person and the gun's muzzle increases with the size of the wound. The report also mentioned that Nancy was battling or attempting to defend herself if there were charred particles on her clothing. With her husband Randall and their 1-year-old child, Nancy had been at home by herself. There were no other people present, and no instances of forced entry, according to Randall. The police had, of course, located their main suspect. Detectives began questioning Randall as soon as they could. He gave them the essentials, then admitted that he and Nancy had been fighting over the gun and that during the commotion, he couldn't remember who had pulled the trigger. Randall changed his story, withdrew his statement, and gave the officers a new one after the police poked and prodded him further. He admitted to the police that he had just walked in when Nancy pulled the trigger. By the time Randall entered the room and realized what was happening, she had already shot herself. These two iterations were utterly incompatible with one another. The detectives spoke with Nancy's friends, family, and co-workers because it was crucial to learn the truth about what had actually occurred. Every one of them believed Randall was somehow connected to her demise. In order to finally make sense of the situation and establish a solid case against Nancy's husband, the police had only needed a little bit more proof. 2 days after the initial interrogation, the police therefore called Randall in for another round of questioning. They were unable to elicit a confession from him. The police were then visited by Randall's parents, who assured them that their son was prepared to take a polygraph test to prove his innocence. But Randall failed to appear for the appointment. He had completely stopped assisting the police by April of that year. The police declared Nancy McKevers' alleged suicide case to be cold in the absence of any additional leads or fresh evidence. Nancy's family learned a week after her funeral that there were no leads in the case and that there was no evidence of foul play. The family therefore made every effort to leave this gloomy episode in the past. Not only was Nancy's son deprived of all the love she had to give after her death in 1983, but her entire family also underwent a permanent change. The news had a significant impact on them. They were never the same after Nancy died because she was such a significant part of their lives. When Nancy's family learned of her passing, they were in shock. She was a happy, laid-back woman who delighted in every aspect of parenting. They couldn't believe Nancy shot herself in the head while her son was still inside the house. She would never have taken any action that would have permanently cut off her relationship with her son. Nancy's mother, Lenore Pepper, wasn't sure about the circumstances surrounding her daughter's passing. She had suspicions about Randall, but was unable to speak about them. Lenore Pepper let her suspicions die after she had already lost her daughter, and the police had officially informed them that no foul play was suspected. Randall was in charge of raising his 1-year-old son after facing no charges. Lenore did not want to stir up a situation that she was ill-equipped to handle. She had serious reservations about Randall but chose to remain silent in order to safeguard her grandson, in case her doubts and uncertainties turned out to be unfounded. Everyone who knew Nancy, including her mother, believed that it could not have been a suicide. However, without an answer from the investigators, their skepticism persisted. Nancy's sister thought it was an awful accident that was never intended to occur. She passed away when she was only 28. Her life, her hopes, and all of her dreams vanished in an instant. No one anticipated that the detectives would reopen the Nancy McKever's case in August 2022 because it had been closed for such a long time. The cold case investigations were handled by the police officers working in the Violent Crimes Unit. When they looked through Nancy McKever's file, they realized that justice needed to be done. Even though Nancy hadn't committed suicide, nobody knew it. She was brutally murdered. The police reviewed the previously gathered evidence before proceeding. A member of the investigation team named Detective Anel Serik described the case as being under-investigated. Since the detective in charge of the case from 1983 had already passed away, there was no way to determine why the officers let this case go cold for so long. It was discovered that the police work of the 1980s was not thorough. The Washington County Sheriff's Office's Forensic Science Unit retested the 1983 evidence, and the results were exactly the same as before. The likelihood that Nancy's death was a suicide was entirely discounted. The police now think that domestic violence played a role in Nancy McKever's passing in this case. Due to concerns for the family's privacy, investigators decided not to disclose to the media which new leads were investigated. Around 20 people were interviewed by the police, including deputies, detectives, firefighters, and family members who were either there in 1983 or had a close connection to the case. Nancy's story was still relevant 40 years later, and as more information emerged after all these years, the mystery surrounding the case started becoming clear. According to Nancy's file, which was kept with the police, detectives learned that during the case's initial investigation, when the police questioned Nancy's family and Randall, they learned that Randall had been planning to kill Nancy because she wanted a divorce and to leave him. One of the case's investigators, Anel Serik, expressed his perplexity over the lack of action in the 1980s in spite of this clear evidence. "I can't tell you why they did what they did," he said. Eventually, everything started to make sense, and Randall started to emerge as the main suspect in Nancy McKever's murder. By the time the evidence came to light, Randall was residing in Tybard, an Oregon town 10 miles south of Portland. In January 2023, the police showed up at his home and questioned him about the murder of his wife 40 years ago. He admitted to the detectives that hypnotherapy had been used to help him forget everything about that day. By this point, the police had enough leads, and since they desired that Nancy's family experience genuine closure, they sent the case to the Washington County District Attorney's Office for review after speaking with Randall. It turned out that the information Nancy's family was given for 40 years was false. The Nancy McKever's case had undergone enough twists by this point. So when police learned that Randall had killed himself on February 8, 2023, they were horrified. Additionally, he left a note in which he explicitly denied being to blame for Nancy's death. The police thought that Randall's passing brought the case to a conclusion, even though the district attorney's office was unable to review it after his passing. Now that their main suspect has passed away, Nancy McKever's case has been successfully concluded. Lenore was shocked to learn that her suspicions about her daughter's death had been accurate the entire time when the police contacted her. Lenore, the mother of Nancy, expressed her appreciation to the policemen for being able to see her daughter's case through to the end. She wished Nancy's father had lived to see the conclusion of their daughter's case. Everyone loved Nancy, so the news of her heinous murder caused a wide range of emotions. Her family experienced all their emotions again. But everyone in the family thought that Randall's suicide was just as much of a witness as his actual court case. Although he insisted he had nothing to do with Nancy's death, his own passing served as the acceptance Nancy's family had been hoping for 4 decades. Following the shock of learning that their cherished Nancy had been murdered after 40 years, Nancy's family is informing more of her loved ones of the news, and they are preparing to hold a memorial service for her. Nevertheless, they have experienced fresh grief and trauma. The investigation team that gave her justice was applauded by the entire family. Nancy's family had the misconception that she had committed suicide for 40 years. Although the investigation into Nancy McKever's death has been concluded, Washington County Sheriff's Office deputies are still looking for additional information. They want anyone with fresh information to come forward and contact the detectives at 5038462700, so that Nancy, who was thought to have chosen death for all these years, can receive justice. Do you think Randall murdered his wife? Why couldn't the 1980s detectives establish a convincing case against Randall? Please share your thoughts with us in the comments. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay safe and alert for the next mystery to be unraveled.